found out I was pregnant and said, "Not my child," and kicked me out. But a lawyer called me. "Your first husband from the 2010s left you his entire fortune, $77 million, but condition. My name is Megan Harper, and for 6 years I was married to Derek Harper. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburb north of Atlanta. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and the HOA sends passive-aggressive letters about lawn height. I was an architect at a mid-sized firm downtown. Derek managed commercial real estate. On paper, we were fine, more than fine. We were the couple people pointed to at dinner parties and said, "Look how well they've done, but paper lies." Looking back, the first real warning sign came about 14 months before everything fell apart. Derek started taking calls in the garage. I noticed it one evening when I came home late from a site visit. His car was in the driveway. The kitchen light was on, but the house was quiet. I found him standing between the tool shelves and his old golf bag, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. He saw me and held up one finger. "Wait." He ended the call, came inside, kissed me on the cheek, and said it was a client issue. I believed him. Then there was the money. Derek had always handled our joint account, which I'd agreed to early in the marriage because his schedule was more flexible. But around that same time, I noticed small withdrawals. 200 here, 300 there, always in cash, always on weekdays when I was at work. When I brought it up over dinner one night, he smiled that calm smile of his and said he'd been taking clients to lunch, paying for parking, the usual. "You know, I always forget to keep receipts," he said. I nodded. I let it go. The calls continued, the cash withdrawals continued, and Derek began doing something new. He started asking me almost casually about my past, specifically about Thomas. Thomas Caldwell had been my first husband. We married young. I was 24, he was 31, and divorced 4 years later, not out of bitterness, but out of a quiet mutual recognition that we had grown into different people. There were no children. There was no dramatic ending. He moved to Portland, started a tech company, and we lost touch completely. I hadn't spoken to Thomas in over a decade. So, when Derek began mentioning him, "Whatever happened to that first guy of yours, the tech one?" I thought it was ordinary curiosity, but he asked more than once, 3 times in 2 months. Each time dressed up differently, a joke, a passing comment, a question buried inside another question. I thought it was jealousy. I thought it was insecurity. I filed it under things to address in couples therapy someday, and moved on. I was 8 weeks pregnant when everything changed. I had taken 2 tests at home before confirming it with my OBGYN. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. We hadn't been actively trying, but we hadn't been preventing it either, and I had assumed, foolishly. I now understand that Derek and I were on the same page about wanting a family. I came home on a Tuesday evening with a small gift bag, a onesie that read "Future Architect," and the printed ultrasound photo tucked beneath it in tissue paper. I remember every second of what came next. Derek opened the bag. He looked at the onesie. He looked at the ultrasound. He sat both down on the kitchen island, with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who had already decided something. And then he looked at me with eyes recognize, flat, cold, calculated, and said words I will never unhear for the rest of my life. "That's not my child." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought I had to think that he was joking, but his face didn't move. He said it again. He said he knew I had been unfaithful. He said he had suspected it for months. He said he wanted me out of the house that night. When I tried to speak, tried to reach for him, he stepped back like I was something he didn't want to touch. By 9 that evening, I was sitting in my car in a Kroger parking lot 2 miles away. The onesie still in the gift bag on the passenger seat with nowhere to go and no idea what had just happened to my life. I sat there for a long time in the dark, and I asked myself one question over and over. What does a man who has been happily married for 6 years do when he finds out his wife is pregnant? And his very first reaction is absolute certainty that the child isn't his. I didn't have the answer yet, but somewhere in the back of my mind, a small cold part of me had already started looking for it. I slept in my car that night, not in some dramatic movie scene way, not curled up in the back seat with a blanket and tears streaming down my face. I sat in the driver's seat with the heating on because it was February and Atlanta. February is deceptive, mild during the day, cold enough to ache at night. I didn't cry for a long time. I just sat. The Kroger parking lot was still open. People walked in and out with grocery bags, loading their trunks, arguing gently with their kids about which cereal they could buy. Normal life. 15 feet away from me, completely unreachable. By midnight, I had done the accounting. I had roughly $400 in my personal checking account. I had transferred most of my savings into our joint account over the past 2 years, because Derek had suggested it made bill paying easier. My laptop was inside the house. My work files, my drafting tools, 3 weeks of project notes, all inside the house. My health insurance was tied to Derek's employer plan, because when I'd gone freelance for 8 months 2 years ago, it had been simpler to stay on his. I was 8 weeks pregnant with no independent insurance, no accessible savings, and no key to a door that didn't belong to my husband. I was also, I realized, potentially sitting on information that Derek had been banking on me never having. That thought arrived quietly without drama. I turned it over carefully. The way you handle something fragile. Thomas Caldwell, my first husband. Derek had asked about him 3 times in 2 months. Why? Derek was not a sentimental man. Not prone to jealousy without cause. He researched things. He tracked things. He had spent 20 years in commercial real estate, learning to identify value before other people noticed it. So if Derek had been asking about Thomas, it wasn't because he was insecure. It was because he had found out something about Thomas that I hadn't. And the only thing worth finding out about a divorced ex-spouse was money. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I searched Thomas Caldwell's name. His company, a mid-sized software firm he'd founded in Portland, had been acquired 3 years ago. The acquisition price had not been publicly disclosed. But the acquirer was a firm I recognized, and firms like that didn't buy small. There were a few business profiles, a LinkedIn page that hadn't been updated since the acquisition, and nothing after that. Thomas, it seemed, had gone quiet after the sale. Deliberately quiet. I stared at my phone screen in the dark parking lot. What did Derek know that I didn't? And how long had he known it? I didn't sleep much. Around 5 in the morning, I drove to a 24-hour diner on Peachtree and ordered coffee and eggs I barely touched. I sat in a booth by the window and thought by the time the breakfast crowd started coming in, I had the beginning of something that wasn't quite a plan yet, but was the skeleton of one. First, I needed to get back into that house and retrieve my documents, my passport, my social security card, my personal laptop, and the external hard drive where I kept copies of my architectural work. These were mine. Derek could not legally prevent me from taking my own belongings, but I knew him well enough to know he would try. Second, I needed legal advice before I did anything else. Not a divorce attorney. Not yet. I needed someone who could tell me exactly where I stood financially, what my rights were regarding the joint account, and whether Derek could legally change the locks on a home that was mortgaged in both our names. I suspected he couldn't. I wanted to be sure. Third, I needed to be tested. I was 8 weeks pregnant, uninsured for the moment, and I had no idea what my options were going to look like. I needed that answered quickly. And fourth, this was the part that felt both fragile and essential. I needed to find out what Derek knew about Thomas Caldwell. Because if Derek had been tracking my ex-husband's financial situation before our marriage fell apart, then his accusation of infidelity had not been spontaneous. It had been a strategy. Why would a man invent a reason to throw out a pregnant wife? The answer was uncomfortable and clarifying all at once. Because he wanted the wife gone before something happened that would entitle her to something he wanted for himself. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and let that sit. I wasn't a stupid woman. I had built a career reading structural plans, identifying load-bearing elements, seeing where pressure would cause failure. I could read this the same way. Derek had seen something coming, some financial event connected to Thomas, and he had moved to eliminate me from the equation before that event arrived. The pregnancy had accelerated his timeline. That was all. He had made one significant error. He had done it too fast and too crudely. A man who plans carefully doesn't scream accusations across a kitchen island. He had panicked, and panic leaves mistakes. I left $2 on the table, pulled on my coat, and walked out into the cold Atlanta morning, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel. Steady. Not happy, not safe, but steady. In the way a building is steady when its foundations are properly set. I knew what I was standing on now. I knew which walls were load-bearing and which ones were just decoration. I got in my car, pulled up the contact list on my phone, and found the number of Claire Sutton, a family law attorney I'd met twice at professional networking events. I had her number because she'd once asked me to look over architectural plans for her office renovation. It was barely 7 in the morning. I sent her a text anyway. Claire, it's Megan Harper. I need a consultation as soon as possible. Family matter urgent. I'm sorry about the hour. Her reply came 11 minutes later. I'll move my 9 a.m. Come in at 8:45. I exhaled slowly. The plan was still just a skeleton, but skeletons I knew were where everything begins. Claire Sutton's office was in Buckhead on the 14th floor of a building I'd walked past 100 times without ever going inside. Her assistant met me in the lobby at 8:40 and led me to a small conference room that smelled like fresh coffee and printer paper. I was still wearing yesterday's clothes. I hadn't showered. I had stopped at a CVS on the way to buy a travel toothbrush and a clean undershirt, and that was the best I'd managed. Claire came in at 8:45 exactly, set a yellow legal pad on the table, and looked at me with the level, unrolled expression of someone who'd heard a great many terrible things in this room, and had learned to meet them all with the same calm. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the beginning, and don't edit. I told her everything. She took notes without interrupting. When I finished 22 minutes later, I noticed the clock. She set down her pen and folded her hands. Let's deal with the immediate issues first, she said. The house is mortgaged in both names. Correct. It was. Then he cannot legally change the locks and deny you entry. If he has already done so, that's a civil matter. We can move on quickly. Second, the joint account. Has he moved money out of it since last night? I didn't know. Check right now, she said, and slid her phone across the table. I logged into the joint account through the bank app. The balance was $43. 2 days ago, it had held just over $31,000. I set the phone down on the table. My hand was completely still, which surprised me. He moved it last night, I said. Claire's expression didn't change, but she picked up her pen. Timestamp transfers. I looked. Yes. 3 transfers, all made between 9:47 and 10:12 p.m., roughly an hour after he'd put me out of the house, into an account I didn't recognize. That's marital asset dissipation, Claire said, writing, and it gives us grounds to move immediately for a temporary restraining order on further transfers. How long have you been married? 6 years. Is Georgia your state of duisel for the full duration? Yes. Then you're in an equitable distribution state. He doesn't get to simply move the money and keep it. She paused. Now, tell me about the first husband. I told her about Thomas, what little I knew, and what I'd found the night before. She listened carefully. You think your current husband located information about your ex-husband's estate or financial status and acted to remove you from the picture before something, inheritance, bequest, some triggering event could occur? She said it plainly without inflection. I think it's possible. I said it's more than possible. She said it's a coherent motive, and it changes the shape of your divorce case considerably if it's true. She leaned back. I want you to do something today after you leave here. I want you to contact the state bar's attorney referral line and ask specifically for estate attorneys who handle inheritance disputes. You need to know whether Thomas Caldwell has any legal document that names you a will, a trust, a beneficiary designation. You won't have access to that without a formal inquiry, but an estate attorney can navigate the process. I nodded. My pen was moving. And Megan, document everything. Every text, every call log, every bank statement you can access. Screenshot and email to yourself, not to any account Derek has access to. Do you have a personal email account he doesn't know? I did an old one from before we married that I'd never given him. Use only that, she said. Starting now. I left Claire's office at 10 with a folder of intake forms, a list of action items, and something I hadn't had in 12 hours. Direction. The Atlanta morning was bright and sharp. The kind of clear winter day that makes everything look more manageable than it is. I sat in my car in the parking garage and worked through the list methodically. I sent the bank screenshots to my old personal email. I photographed the transfer records. I composed a message to the joint accounts bank flagging the unauthorized transfers and requesting that a hold be placed pending legal proceedings. Claire had given me the specific language. Then I called Thomas's family. I hadn't spoken to them in over a decade, but I remembered his sister, Rachel, who'd always been kind to me during our marriage. I found her on Facebook, same name, same face, older. I sent a private message saying only that I was Megan, Thomas's ex-wife, and that I had reason to believe I might need to speak with someone about his estate. I said I was sorry for reaching out this way. I said I hoped she was well. She called me back in 40 minutes. Her voice was quiet when she said, Megan Thomas passed away in September, a stroke. He was 47. She paused. His attorneys have been trying to reach you. How did you not know? I told her I hadn't. I told her my situation had changed recently. She was silent for a moment. He never remarried. She said he talked about you sometimes near the end. He said you were the one person who never wanted anything from him. Another pause. His estate attorney is named Gordon Reeves. He's in Portland. Megan, you should call him today. I sat in the parking garage for a long moment after the call ended. Thomas was gone. He'd been gone for 5 months, and his attorneys had been looking for me. The geometry of everything shifted in that moment. The cash withdrawals, the questions about Thomas, the accusation on Tuesday night. The money moved out of the account within an hour of my leaving. Derek hadn't suspected it. Derek had known. He had known before I did. He had found out about Thomas's death months ago. Somehow, a news item, a mutual contact, a search he'd run on his own. He had spent those months calculating, and when I came home with a pregnancy announcement that threatened to complicate his plans, he had moved. That was the point of no return. Not when he said, "That's not my child." Not when I sat in the Kroger parking lot. Right here in this parking garage in Buckhead when I understood that my husband had made a deliberate decision to destroy my life based on information I hadn't even known existed. I called Gordon Reeves's office in Portland. His assistant put me on hold for 4 minutes. When Gordon Reeves picked up, his voice was careful and professional, and relieved all at once. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I'm very glad you called. There's a matter of considerable importance regarding the estate of Thomas Caldwell, and you are a named beneficiary." "How considerable?" I asked. $77 million, he said. "But there is one condition attached." $77 million. I sat with those words for a long moment in that parking garage, watching the number on the cement wall in front of me. Level 3. As if the universe wanted to give me something concrete to look at while my entire understanding of the situation rearranged itself. Gordon Reeves explained the condition carefully. Thomas had structured his estate through a revocable trust. Most of the assets, proceeds from the company acquisition, real estate holdings, investment accounts, had been consolidated and set aside. The condition for my inheritance was a formality, not a barrier. I needed to appear in person at the Portland law offices within 60 days of formal notification to sign the beneficiary verification documents and complete identity confirmation. Thomas, Gordon explained, had been methodical and cautious. He'd built that condition in specifically to prevent the kind of opportunistic claim that large estates always attracted. He had wanted me to show up in person because he trusted that I would, and that anyone pretending to be me wouldn't bother. He updated the trust 8 months before he died. Gordon said, "You were always in it from the original drafting, but the revision increased the amount substantially following the final disbursements from the acquisition." "Was the trust a matter of public record?" I asked. A slight pause. The existence of a trust can sometimes be inferred through business filings. The specific terms would not be public, but someone with resources and motivation who was specifically looking could potentially have learned about its existence through indirect means. Gordon paused again. "Is there a reason you're asking?" "Yes," I said, "there is." I told him in brief about Derek, about the timing, about the money moved out of the joint account the night he threw me out. Gordon was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he said, "Mrs. Harper, I would strongly advise you to instruct your attorney to ensure that any inheritance you receive is classified as separate property and placed in the account to which your husband has no legal access. Given that you're still technically married, the legal architecture matters enormously." "I'm aware," I said. "I was with my attorney this morning." "Good," he said. "Come to Portland as soon as you can." I flew to Portland 4 days later. Claire had expedited the restraining order in the joint account, which the judge had granted within 48 hours. And she had also sent a formal letter to Derek's attorney establishing that I had right of access to the marital home, to retrieve my personal property. A sheriff's deputy accompanied me when I went back. Derek was home. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched me collect my things with an expression I hadn't seen before on his face. Not anger, not contempt, but the specific calculating blankness of a man doing arithmetic. He said nothing. His mother, Linda, was there as well, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her eyes tracking every item I carried out. Linda Harper was 71 years old, small-framed with white hair she kept in a precise bob, and the warm grandmotherly manner of someone who used warmth, the way a fisherman uses bait. She'd never liked me. I had known that from the first Christmas, but she'd never shown it directly. She showed it in small calibrations. The way she asked about my work with just slightly too much surprise at my answers, the way she deferred to Derek's versions of shared stories. She was, I had long understood, the engine behind much of Derek's thinking. He was not a stupid man, but he was a man who needed a woman to sharpen his intelligence, and Linda had been doing that his entire life. As I carried out my last box, she spoke for the first time. "You're making a mistake, Megan," she said pleasantly, as if offering advice about a recipe. I picked up the box and didn't answer. I signed the documents in Portland on a Thursday. Gordon Reeves's office occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the Pearl District, with tall windows looking out over the city. His paralegal offered me water and the kind of careful professional courtesy that people extend when they know the numbers involved. The process took 4 hours. Identity verification, document review, legal attestation of marital status, and prior divorce from Thomas Gordon walked me through every page. The funds would be released in stages. An initial disbursement of approximately $8 million within 30 days with the balance to follow over 18 months, as various holdings were liquidated in an orderly manner. I flew back to Atlanta on Friday night. On Saturday morning my phone rang. It was a number I didn't know. I answered. A man's voice, measured slightly too casual, said, "Megan, this is a friend of Derek's. I just want to let you know as a courtesy that people who do what you're doing sometimes find that things get complicated for them professionally, socially. You're an architect with a license to maintain. Licenses can be challenged." A pause. "It might be worth thinking about whether this is really the road you want to take." I stood in the kitchen of the friend's apartment where I'd been staying. My colleague Jess had offered me her spare room, and I held the phone against my ear and thought about how afraid I was supposed to feel right now. I said, "Tell me your name." The line went dead. I called Claire. Then I called Gordon. Both of them confirmed the same thing. A threat against a professional license made by phone by an identified third party at the direction of an opposing party in active litigation was a serious legal exposure for Derek. I had received it on a cell phone. The metadata was automatically logged by my carrier. Claire filed a harassment motion by Monday afternoon. Derek's attorney called Claire on Tuesday, asking to discuss a more constructive approach to resolution. Claire called me afterward. I could hear the suppressed satisfaction in her voice. "They didn't expect you to have legal representation already in place. She said they expected you to be scrambling." "I know." I said, "They're going to try something else." She said, "Rest for a few days, eat, sleep. You're going to need your steadiness for what comes next." So, I did. I spent 3 days doing almost nothing. I walked in Piedmont Park in the mornings, bought soup from a deli near Jess's apartment, read a novel I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. I let my body do the quiet work of growing the person inside it. My first OB appointment at a new practice enrolled under my own ACA plan, which Claire had helped me set up, was on Wednesday. Strong heartbeat, everything where it should be. I sat in the car afterward in the clinic parking lot, and felt for the first time in 2 weeks something approaching peace. It didn't last long, but it was real while it was there. The approach came on a Thursday, 10 days after the harassment motion had been filed. Derek's attorney, a man named Stuart Pell, whom I'd never met but whose name had appeared on every document Claire had received, sent a formal letter proposing mediation. Attached to it, in what I understood immediately was not coincidence, was a financial settlement offer. Derek would agree not to contest the divorce, would waive any claims against the joint account freeze, and would, the letter used the word generously, agree to forego any challenge to my separate property designation of the Portland inheritance. In exchange, I would drop the harassment motion, accept a reduced share of the marital assets, and sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing the circumstances of the marital separation with any third parties. I read it twice. Then I called Claire. "He's trying to buy your silence," she said immediately. "The NDA is the tell. He doesn't care about the money split. He cares about what you know and what you might say about it." "About him tracking Thomas's estate before throwing me out," I said. "Exactly. That's a pattern of conduct that, if it became part of the public divorce record, would be professionally and socially damaging. He's in commercial real estate. Reputation matters." She paused. "The offer is also financially unfavorable to you. Your share of marital assets under Georgia equitable distribution given the duration of the marriage and the dissipation of the joint account would almost certainly exceed what they're offering. So, we decline," I said. "We decline." she confirmed. And we do it without counterproposing, which signals that you're not looking for a negotiated middle, you're looking for a full accounting. That was what we did. I won't pretend I was unmoved by the offer. There is a version of yourself, tired, pregnant, living in a friend's spare room, uncertain about the future, who looks at a number on a page and thinks, what if this is enough? What if you just took it, signed the paper, and started over somewhere quiet? I sat with that version of myself for about 40 minutes one afternoon on Jess's couch with a cup of tea while the Atlanta rain came down against the window. And then I put it away because the offer wasn't about helping me, it was about protecting Derek, and more specifically, I suspected, about protecting Linda, because someone had spent months researching Thomas Caldwell's estate, and Derek, for all his calculated intelligence, was not a man who worked alone. He managed property, he negotiated leases, sustained patient research into the financial life of his wife's ex-husband, conducted over months without triggering my suspicion. That required someone Derek trusted, someone with time and motivation, and nothing to lose. His mother had been the one sitting at the kitchen table when I came to collect my things. His mother with her folded hands and her tracking eyes. I called Rachel Caldwell, Thomas's sister, and asked her one careful question. Had anyone contacted her or anyone in Thomas's family in the months following his death, asking questions about the estate or about me? Rachel was quiet for a moment. A woman called, she said finally, about 2 months after Thomas died, said she was a journalist, writing about tech acquisitions. She asked whether Thomas had left any significant bequests. I didn't think much of it. I said I didn't know the details. A pause. She had an Atlanta area code. That was enough. Jess had been my friend since graduate school. We'd met in a structural engineering seminar and discovered we had identical opinions about bad coffee and good architecture. She was practical, funny, and possessed of the specific kind of loyalty that doesn't express itself in speeches, but in actions. She had handed me her spare key within 12 hours of my calling her, no questions asked, and she had said very simply, "Stay as long as you need." That evening, she came home from work and found me at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of me. She made pasta. She poured wine for herself and water for me. She sat down and said, "Tell me where you are." I told her all of it. The estate, the offer, the phone call with the threat, Rachel's information about the woman who'd called asking about the bequests. Jess listened in the way she always listened, without interruption, with her eyes on my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So, the mother found out about the inheritance before Derek threw you out?" She said, "I believe so. And the plan was to get rid of you before the estate was settled, so you'd have no spousal claim except you were already a direct beneficiary. So that wouldn't have changed anything anyway." "I know," I said. "I think they miscalculated. I think they assumed Thomas had left me something modest, or that the estate would pass to family. I don't think they knew the scale of it. So they panicked when they realized." Jess said, "I think so. And then I got pregnant, which complicated the exit timeline, and Derek made a decision that was faster than it was smart." Jess ate a fork full of pasta. "What do you need from me?" "I might need a witness," I said. "At some point, someone who can attest to what my circumstances were when I arrived here. The timeline matters legally." "Done," she said, without hesitation. I looked at her across the table. Outside the window, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Atlanta at night has a particular quality of light, amber and diffuse, kind to the tired. I had been running on very little for 3 weeks, and kindness, even from streetlights, was something I noticed. "Thank you," I said. She waved it off. "Don't thank me when..." Somewhere across the city, in a 4-bedroom house north of Atlanta, Derek and Linda were watching. I knew they were watching, and I knew that their next move would not be a letter. I was right. They came on a Sunday, not together. Linda came first alone, which I should have recognized immediately as a tactic. She called Jess's number, which I hadn't given her, which meant Derek had found it somehow. She called at 10 in the morning and asked if she could come by just to talk. She used the word please, which I had never heard her direct at me before. I thought for 30 seconds. Then I said yes, because refusing to meet her would give her nothing, while meeting her would give me information. She arrived at 11 carrying a small container of homemade cookies, which was so precisely calibrated to project harmlessness that it almost made me admire her. She sat in Jess's living room and declined tea, and looked around the apartment with the particular expression of someone cataloging without appearing to catalog. "I want to apologize," she said, "for Derek, for the way this all happened. I sat across from her and said nothing. He panicked, she continued. He's been under enormous stress with the business, and when you told him about the pregnancy, he reacted badly. He knows that. He's devastated. She clasped her hands together. Megan, this doesn't have to be what it's become. You two have a life together. 6 years and now there's a baby. She let that sit for a moment. A baby needs a father, a complete family. Think about what you're doing to that child by pursuing this the way you're pursuing it. There it was, clean and quiet and aimed precisely. And the inheritance, I said. A half-second pause, so brief that if I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. That's a private family matter, she said smoothly. It has nothing to do with your marriage, Linda, I said. Who made the call to Thomas Caldwell's family posing as a journalist? Something moved across her face. Fast, controlled, gone within a second. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. She reset. The warmth returned, recalibrated. Megan, I'm asking you, as the grandmother of your unborn child, to stop and think about what you're destroying. Derek is willing to start over. He's willing to go to counseling to rebuild trust. All he's asking is that you set this other matter aside. It's complicated his business relationships. There are optics. He wants me to drop the lawsuit, I said, and sign an NDA. He wants his wife back, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. 71 years old, white hair, container of cookies on the coffee table, a woman who had spent her whole life understanding that warmth was a tool, that patience was a weapon, that the most effective way to control a situation was to be the one who always seemed reasonable. Linda, I said, I know about the transfers. I know about the research into Thomas's estate. I know about the call to Rachel Caldwell. My attorney knows about the call to Rachel Caldwell. A judge has already granted a motion, establishing that Derek dissipated marital assets. I stood up. Tell Derek that the answer is no. Tell him it was always going to be no, and tell him that if anyone contacts my witnesses, my attorney, my employer, or my doctor's office again, we will be filing additional motions before the week is out. Linda's warmth evaporated. It didn't happen slowly. It was immediate, like a screen powering down. The face underneath was something else. Precise, dry, calculating. You're making an enemy, she said. I already have one, I said. I'd just rather know who she is. She stood. She picked up the cookies. She walked to the door, and at the door she turned and said something I hadn't expected. Not a threat, but a promise. Said in a flat voice without any warmth at all. You have no idea who you're dealing with. She left. I stood in Jess's living room after the door closed, and noticed that my hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, or not only fear, it was the physical aftermath of sustained control. The way your body releases what your face was not allowed to show. I was afraid. It would be dishonest to say I wasn't. Linda Harper was not a woman who made threats she didn't intend to keep. She had resources, social connections, and 60 years of practiced manipulation. She had raised Derek, which meant she had spent decades studying how to identify a person's soft points and press them. But I noticed something. The fear didn't make me want to retreat. It made me want to finish. I thought of something my father had told me when I was very young. He was an engineer, practical and precise. And he had said, Megan, the only structures that fail are the ones that weren't built to carry the actual load. He meant buildings, but I had come to understand it more broadly. I had been built to carry more than Derek or Linda had accounted for. I called Claire and told her about Linda's visit. I had recorded it on my phone. Recording is legal in Georgia, with one-party consent. Claire listened to the playback and said very quietly, Perfect. I called Gordon Reeves and gave him an update. He confirmed that the first disbursement from Thomas's estate had cleared the trust's holding account and would be accessible within the week. Then I sat down and wrote in the small notebook I'd been keeping a record of dates, conversations, and decisions. And I wrote at the top of the page, They are afraid. Fear is useful. And I underlined it. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. Claire had filed for discovery 3 weeks earlier, requesting financial records, communications, and account histories going back 24 months. Derek's attorney had objected to almost everything, and the judge had overruled almost all of it. The picture that emerged from the documents was by that point not surprising, but it was thorough. Derek had first searched Thomas Caldwell's name in April of the previous year. The search was logged in the discovery of his work laptop, which his attorney had fought to exclude, and failed. He'd visited 3 websites, a business news aggregator that had covered the tech acquisition, Thomas's LinkedIn profile, and the website of a Portland-based estate law firm whose general information page described the kind of revocable trust Thomas had used. Linda's phone records obtained through a subpoena Claire had fought 2 weeks for showed a 17-minute call to a number registered to Rachel Caldwell in November, 4 months after Thomas's death. That was the call Rachel had described to me. The same phone record showed 11 calls between Linda and Derek in the 72 hours immediately before he threw me out. There was also an email sent from Derek's personal account to Stuart Pell's private address, in which Derek wrote in plain language that he needed the situation resolved before the Portland attorneys make contact with M. The email was dated the Thursday before he threw me out on Tuesday. He had known for days. He had planned it. The deposition took place in Claire's conference room, the same room where she had slid her phone across the table and told me to check the joint account balance. 4 months later, and everything was different. Derek sat across from me for the first time since the night in the kitchen. He wore a gray suit and had the composed, slightly wooden expression of a man who had been coached extensively on how to appear. The first 40 minutes were procedural. Derek answered in the measured cadences of prepared lines, using the phrase, "I don't recall," with practiced frequency. Then Claire got to the email. She printed it, at full size on a single sheet, and slid it across the table without a word, the way a card player lays down a hand. Derek looked at it. Something shifted in his posture, barely perceptible. But I'd spent 6 years learning to read that body. "Mr. Harper, do you recognize this email? It appears to be from my account. Did you write it?" "I may have." The email refers to the Portland attorneys making contact with Ma. "Who is M?" Stuart Pell objected. Claire rephrased. Derek said he didn't recall. "Mr. Harper, were you aware prior to the 14th of October that your wife was a named beneficiary in Thomas Caldwell's estate?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. "I had some information that suggested there might be yes or no, Mr. Harper." Stuart Pell put a hand on Derek's arm. Derek said, "I decline to answer on the grounds that you've waived Fifth Amendment protection by appearing in a civil deposition without invoking at the outset." Claire said with the pleasant precision of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. "The refusal to answer has been logged for the record." Derek looked at Stuart Pell. Something happened between them in that glance. A conversation made entirely of eyes. And I watched Derek understand in real time that the architecture he'd built had failed. It didn't collapse dramatically. It settled, the way a structure settles when a load-bearing element gives way, slowly, then, all at once. He looked at me. I had wondered what I would feel in this moment. Satisfaction, anger, grief, some complicated mixture. What I actually felt was none of those. What I felt was the clear, weightless calm of someone standing in a building they built themselves, knowing exactly which walls will hold. I held his gaze and said nothing. He looked away first. In the elevator going down, Claire said, "He'll settle before this goes to the judge." "I know," I said. The doors opened. We walked out into the March afternoon. Clear sky. That particular light that makes Atlanta look for a moment like a city that is done with winter. Megan Claire said, "How are you?" I thought about it honestly. My back ached. I was tired. I missed having a home that was mine. I was also, in some specific way I hadn't expected, no longer afraid. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm actually fine." Derek settled 11 days after the deposition. He had no real choice. The settlement was 23 pages. Derek relinquished all claims to Thomas's estate in perpetuity, acknowledged it as my separate property, and paid back the full $31,000 plus interest. I received 60% of the marital assets, the house, the investment accounts, the equity in his business holdings. Based on the court's finding of deliberate dissipation and bad faith, the NDA was gone. I signed nothing that silenced me. Paternity had been established by prenatal DNA test at 12 weeks. Derek was the biological father. That result was included in the settlement record. Proof in black and white that he had been wrong from the very beginning. I hope he read that page carefully. The first disbursement from Thomas's estate arrived on a Wednesday morning in April. I was in Jess's kitchen when the notification appeared on my phone. I stared at the number and sat very still. I texted Jess. It came through. Her reply, 3 exclamation points, and the word Megan. I called Rachel Caldwell, and told her everything was resolved. She was quiet for a moment. Thomas would have been glad. She said he really would have. Derek signed the final divorce documents on a Thursday. He didn't look at me. The marriage was over. Driving home through Atlanta traffic, my daughter moved inside me for the first time. A small, definitive flutter, like a hand knocking on a door. "I'm here," she said in the language of the not yet born. "I know," I said back. "So am I." Her name is Ellie. Born on a Tuesday in July, 7LB40, with her father's dark eyes, and everyone agrees my stubbornness. She's 8 months old as I write this, making very serious observations about her own feet from a bouncer to my left. We live in a house I bought in Dakar. Better light than the old place with a garden I'm slowly learning to maintain. My practice has 7 clients now. My name is on the door. That means something I find difficult to adequately explain. Thomas's gift altered what is possible for us. And I don't pretend otherwise, but I've tried not to let it alter who I am. I still check my own work. I still call my mother on Sundays. Derek's firm contracted significantly in the year after the divorce. The settlement had required him to liquidate holdings, and the market wasn't kind to smaller operators. He exercises his parental visitation schedule without significant conflict. He is Ellie's father. Whatever he did to me, that remains true. And I try imperfectly on the days I'm still angry to keep those two things separate. Linda I have not spoken to since she left Jess's apartment with her cookies. I don't expect that to change. Jess got married. I was there. Ellie in the baby carrier, crying during the vows. Jess will remind me of that for the rest of our lives. Rachel visited Atlanta in the spring. She brought photographs of Thomas from the years I hadn't known him, hiking in Oregon, standing on a dock in a yellow windbreaker, squinting into the sun with a piece I'd never seen on him when we were married. I was glad he'd had those years. He said you were the most structurally honest person he'd ever known. Rachel told me. I looked at the photograph for a long moment. I know, I said. I tried to be. I sit on my back porch in the mornings and think about the sequence that brought me here. A Tuesday night in February, a parking lot, a diner booth, a conference room in Buckhead. It didn't feel while it was happening like a story with an arc. It felt like standing in a building coming down and finding the walls that would hold the walls held. When Ellie is old enough, I will tell her all of it. Not as a cautionary tale, as a demonstration. See, I'll say, see what holds. If this story taught me anything, it's simple. The people who try to diminish you are always counting on one thing, that you don't know your own worth. Derek counted on my fear. Linda counted on my isolation. They were both wrong. Know your value. Document everything. Find your Jess and never sign away your voice. What would you have done sitting alone in that car in February? Tell me in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for watching. Like, share and follow.